Snow drifted softly outside the bakery windows, the warm glow inside wrapping the room in gold. Customers laughed, coats dusted with frost, while trays of pastries shimmered beneath soft lights. Near the end of the counter sat a young woman in a worn wheelchair, her fingers clutching 3 wrinkled dollars as she stared at a small vanilla cake she couldn't afford. No one noticed her quiet desperation. Not until the door opened and a little girl skipped inside, followed by her father. He paused, saw her, and asked a simple question that would change all 3 of their lives forever. Snow drifted quietly across the narrow street, softening the world with a pale winter hush as the bakery's warm yellow lights flickered through the frosted window. Inside, the sweetness of vanilla and cinnamon filled the air, but Emma Clark barely noticed any of it. She sat just inside the entrance, her thin hands resting on the metal rims of her wheelchair, the cold biting into her knuckles. 22 years old, small-framed, light brown hair tied back in a rushed ponytail, her cheeks hollow from months of skipping meals. Her eyes were the most noticeable thing about her, large and gentle but clouded with a sadness she tried every day to keep hidden. She wore a faded winter coat that had once been sky blue, but was now a patchwork of worn spots and frayed seams. The zipper was broken. A safety pin held it together. Her jeans were thin enough that the chill of the metal wheelchair seeped directly into her bones. But all she could think about was the 3 crumpled dollars in her hand. Her birthday. 22 years old, and she had exactly $3 left after a week of selling lottery tickets at the gas station on Maple Avenue. Selling tickets from early morning until the wind turned cruel in her face, sitting beside the entrance door where people rushed past her as if she were a lamppost. She was used to the stares that lingered too long, the pitying smiles from strangers who did not know what to do with her wheelchair, and the silence of those who pretended not to see her at all. She had learned long ago that being ignored hurt less than being stared at. Today, the gas station manager had told her the storm would get worse. He was a gruff man with a thick beard and a stomach that strained against his coat. But he wasn't unkind. He simply shrugged and said he couldn't have her freezing outside the door, even if she depended on the small commission from each ticket sold. So she had lost another day's income. Another day with nothing but canned soup waiting at home. But today was supposed to be different. Today was supposed to be her birthday. She had walked, or rather rolled, through the snow just to step inside the bakery, drawn by the smell and the warm light and a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could afford one small celebration. One tiny cake. Something to remind herself she was still alive, and not just drifting through days like a ghost on wheels. The cake she wanted sat inside the glass display case, a small vanilla sponge topped with a swirl of white frosting and a single sugar flower. $4. Only 4. She had counted her money 7 times. Still $3. Still not enough. When she finally approached the counter, the clerk, a woman in her mid-40s with curly red hair and soft green eyes behind thick glasses, looked at the money in Emma's trembling hand. The woman's name tag read, Brenda. She looked at Emma with genuine sympathy, not pity. That almost made Emma cry more. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," Brenda said quietly, voice gentle like someone speaking to a wounded bird. "It's $4. I can't ring it up for 3. My manager watches the cameras like a hawk." Emma nodded quickly, forcing a smile, pretending the rejection didn't sting. "It's okay. I'm sorry for the trouble." She turned her wheelchair, intending to slip out before the tears rose. before humiliation swallowed her whole, before the loneliness of another birthday without family became too loud in her chest. But the door burst open before she reached it. A gust of icy air rushed in, carrying the laughter of a child. A small girl, about 6 years old, bundled in a purple puffer coat with white faux fur lining, practically skipped into the bakery. Her cheeks were rosy, her dark lashes dusted with snowflakes melting into her brown eyes. Beside her stepped her father, a tall man with broad shoulders and a calm, steady presence. His name was Daniel Hale, though Emma did not know it yet. He looked to be in his late 30s, lean and strong without trying to be, with neatly trimmed dark brown hair and a jawline shaped by both discipline and exhaustion. He carried himself like someone who had known grief intimately, but refused to let it harden him. His eyes, a warm hazel, scanned the bakery with quiet attentiveness before softening the moment he looked at his daughter. His wedding ring finger was bare, and the faint paleness of the skin told a sadder story. His wife, Sarah, had passed 3 years before from an unexpected stroke. Sarah had been a woman of quiet beauty, tall and slender with ash-blonde hair and pale blue eyes that always seemed to hold a secret smile. She had been an artist who painted sunsets and oceans, leaving behind canvases that Daniel still kept in their home. Her death had carved a wound in him that never fully closed, but Sophie, his daughter, kept him alive with her energy, her giggles, and the way she seemed to fill every room with a brightness Sarah once carried. Little Sophie spotted Emma instantly, her innocent gaze drawn not by the wheelchair, but by the expression Emma struggled to hide. She tugged on her father's hand. "Daddy, she looks sad." Daniel followed her gaze, his eyes meeting Emma's for the first time. Something shifted in his expression. A spark of recognition, not of her, but of pain. Pain he had seen in the mirror before. Pain he understood. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Were you trying to buy a birthday cake?" Emma froze. Her throat tightened. She hated being seen, hated being noticed when she felt small. She nodded once. Sophie stepped closer, peering at Emma with open curiosity, her brown eyes large and sincere. "Is it your birthday today?" Emma nodded again. Sophie smiled so brightly it seemed to warm the bakery by itself. "Daddy says nobody should be alone on their birthday, and birthdays always need cake. That's a rule." Daniel crouched down to Emma's level, an act of respect that made her eyes sting. "If you'll allow it," he said gently. "My daughter and I would be honored to get that cake for you." Emma shook her head at first. Words stuck in her chest. But Sophie placed her mittened hand on Emma's knee and whispered, "Please? I think today is a day for something happy." Something inside Emma cracked. Not painfully, but softly, like the thawing of long frozen ground. She nodded. Brenda, the clerk, smiled warmly and boxed the cake as if it were something precious. In minutes, 3 strangers sat together at a small round table near the fogged window. Brenda lit a tiny candle she kept for special occasions. The bakery was quiet but intimate, the kind of space where even strangers felt connected. Daniel and Sophie began singing Happy Birthday, their voices gentle but full of sincerity. Other customers glanced over, then joined in softly until the small bakery echoed with a chorus that wrapped around Emma like a long-lost embrace. Emma closed her eyes before blowing out the candle, wishing for nothing grand, nothing impossible. She simply wished not to feel forgotten. And for the first time in years, as she opened her eyes to see a father and daughter smiling at her as if she mattered, she felt that wish begin to come true. The snow had thickened by the time they stepped outside the bakery. It drifted in slow spirals beneath the streetlights, coating the world in a soft, white sheen. Emma adjusted her coat as best she could, the safety pin at her collar glinting weakly under the dim light. Her fingers were stiff from earlier hours spent outside selling lottery tickets, each ticket touched by the wet chill that now clung to the bottom of her bag. Daniel stood beside her, holding the pastry box carefully, while Sophie hopped around him, her boots leaving tiny, chaotic prints in the snow. The warmth of the bakery faded quickly, but something gentle remained between the three of them, an invisible thread that tugged softly at Emma's heart. She tried to brush it away before it could grow into something complicated. Daniel watched her maneuver her wheelchair toward the sidewalk, his brow furrowing. He was a man who had learned to move quietly after grief, a man who had practiced restraint until it became a second skin. Years of raising his daughter alone had shaped him into someone patient, methodical, almost too careful at times. But when he saw Emma struggle against a patch of uneven pavement, he stepped forward. "Let me help you with that," he said. His voice was calm, never intrusive. His breath curled in faint clouds in the cold. Emma hesitated before allowing him to steady the chair. Pride was her last armor, and she wore it thin but stubborn. "I should manage," she murmured. "I always do." "I know," he replied softly. "But tonight is snowy and messy, and I'm already here." Sophie tugged on her father's coat sleeve. "Daddy, she has to get home safely. That's also a rule." Emma looked at the little girl, whose brown eyes sparkled with the kind of sincerity that only children possessed. Something in her chest warmed. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. They moved toward the corner where the street met a narrow alley that led to Emma's bus stop. The wind picked up, carrying with it the bitter scent of diesel from the gas station across the road. The station was where she spent most of her days, where she sat on the cold pavement selling lottery tickets. Behind the window stood Pete Donnelly, a Grillo-faced manager in his mid-50s whose reddish beard had more silver than red now. He had a thick build, a permanent slump in his shoulders from years of lifting boxes, and a no-nonsense demeanor that often came across as rough. But he nodded at Emma through the glass as she passed. His nod was small, almost invisible, but it was the closest he came to kindness, and she accepted it with a faint smile. "You work there?" Daniel asked, noticing the exchange. Emma nodded. "Most days. I sell tickets near the entrance. Commission only. If it rains, snows, or if people aren't in the mood to gamble, then nothing." She forced a laugh, but it sounded brittle. "Some days I don't make enough to buy lunch." Daniel's jaw tightened, just slightly. His hazel eyes darkened with something like anger, not at her, but at the world that demanded so much from someone who already had so little. They reached the bus stop shelter, a metal structure streaked with rust and covered in faded advertisements. The fluorescent light above flickered every few seconds, giving the scene an uneven glow. Inside, an elderly man sat hunched on the bench, wrapped in a threadbare coat. His long gray beard was tangled, his eyes the color of storm clouds. Emma recognized Mr. Riley, a retired mechanic who lived alone in a motel room nearby. He lifted his head at the sound of wheels approaching. "Evening, Emma," he rasped. "Hi, Mr. Riley," she said warmly. "Cold tonight." "Colder every year," he muttered with a weak cough. Daniel watched the exchange, noticing how easily Emma softened toward others despite her own hardships. There was a patience in her, a quiet strength that reminded him of Sarah before illness stole her breath. Sarah had been gentle too, but she had carried her gentleness like a shield. Emma carried hers like a burden she chose to bear for the sake of others. Snowflakes settled on Emma's hair as she spoke to Mr. Riley, and Daniel studied her profile in the dim light. She was young, but her eyes were older, weathered by struggles most people never tasted. She adjusted her coat again, and Daniel realized the fabric was so thin it did little against the cold. His instinct urged him to offer his own, but he held back. He did not want pity to weave itself into their fragile connection. Before the bus arrived, Sophie knelt beside Emma's wheelchair, staring at the bag full of lottery tickets. "Are these magic?" she asked. Emma laughed softly. "Not quite. They're supposed to make someone rich if the numbers match. But most of the time, people just lose a few dollars." Sophie looked disappointed. "Magic should work more often." Daniel smiled. "That's why it's called magic, kiddo. Rare and surprising." Sophie tapped her fingers on the armrest of the wheelchair. "Do you play the piano, Emma?" Emma froze at the question. Memories of glossy ivory keys, warm stage lights, and her grandmother's humming rose like ghosts behind her eyes. She swallowed. "I used to, before the accident." "Is it hard now?" Emma nodded. "Harder than it used to be." Sophie's face brightened. "We have a piano. It's old and a little dusty, but it makes nice sounds. Daddy plays sometimes, but only when he thinks I'm asleep. He's shy." Daniel cleared his throat, embarrassed. "It's nothing impressive. A hobby from years ago." "You should come play it," Sophie said. "Or just see it, if you want. No rules for that one." Emma blinked, stunned by the innocence of the invitation. Her heart fluttered with a mixture of longing and fear. The piano was a locked door she had not opened in years. "That's very kind," she said. "But maybe another time." Daniel nodded with understanding. "Whenever you're ready. And if never, that's fine too." The bus rumbled toward them, its headlights slicing through the snowy haze. Emma shifted uneasily. "This is me," she said softly. Daniel handed her the box. "Happy birthday, Emma." Sophie waved both hands in the air. "Good night, birthday girl." Emma rolled onto the bus ramp, the driver nodding in recognition. As the doors closed, she looked out the window. Daniel and Sophie stood together, small figures in the swirling snow. They waved until the bus pulled away, their silhouettes fading into white. For the first time in a very long time, Emma carried home more than a cake. She carried warmth. She carried hope. And as the bus rumbled deeper into the night, she realized the bakery had given her more than a celebration. It had given her a beginning. The afternoon sky was a pale winter blue when Emma heard a knock on her apartment door. She had just returned from another long morning selling lottery tickets outside the Maple Avenue gas station, her fingers still stiff from the cold, despite gripping a cup of cheap vending machine coffee on the bus ride home. Her small studio apartment smelled faintly of disinfectant and canned soup. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the radiator clanked like metal bones shivering. She was not expecting anyone. Almost no one ever visited her. The knock came again, gentle but firm. She wheeled toward the door and opened it cautiously. Daniel stood there, tall and steady as ever, snowflakes melting on the shoulders of his dark gray coat. He carried a small paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon and butter. Beside him stood Sophie, bundled in a bright green scarf nearly twice her size, her cheeks rosy and her eyes alight with excitement. Sophie held a foil-wrapped pastry, her mittened hands gripping it as though it were treasure. "We brought you something," Daniel said. His voice had that calm quality that made Emma feel slightly less fragile just by hearing it. Sophie thrust the pastry forward. I baked them. Well, Daddy helped, but I cracked the egg myself and nothing bad happened. Emma blinked. She wasn't used to people showing up at her door with warmth in their hands. That's very kind, she murmured. She wheeled back to give them space to enter. Daniel stepped inside carefully, scanning the room without judgment, though it was impossible not to notice the cramped layout, the dim lighting, the wheelchair marks worn into the carpet. He was the sort of man who noticed everything but never made anyone feel smaller for it. The faint lines around his eyes deepened when he smiled at her, and his presence, large and quietly steady, filled the tiny space in a way that felt oddly comforting rather than overwhelming. Sophie walked in circles, studying the apartment with the curious intelligence of a child. "It's cozy," she declared proudly, as if the word itself could warm the cold corners. She stopped in front of an old photo frame on the shelf. Inside the frame was a picture of Emma at 16, seated at a piano beside an older woman with silver hair and soft eyes. "Is this your grandma?" Sophie asked. Emma nodded, her heart tightening. "Yes, she taught me everything about music." "She looks nice," Sophie said. "The kind lady kind of nice." She was. Daniel cleared his throat gently. "Sophie and I were wondering if you might have time to help us pick out some beginner sheet music. She keeps talking about pianos now. Well, I don't trust myself to choose what's actually good." He said it with a self-deprecating half-smile. Emma felt something flutter inside her chest, a feeling she did not recognize at first. It was the surprise of being needed for something more than selling a $2 lottery ticket. "Of course," she said. "I can help." "Actually," Daniel added in a quieter tone, "we were hoping you might visit the house. It's easier to understand the piano when you're near it. If you're comfortable with that. No pressure at all." No pressure. The words wrapped around her like a promise. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. The drive to Daniel's house took them away from the gray, worn-down buildings of Emma's neighborhood toward a quieter suburban street where the houses stood neatly in rows, their front yards blanketed in snow. Daniel's house was modest but warm, painted a soft cream with blue shutters, the walkway lined by dormant rose bushes waiting for spring. It was not luxurious, not extravagant, just lived in, loved in, and that alone made it feel like stepping into another world for a moment. Inside, the home was warmly lit, with wooden floors scattered with Sophie's toys and drawings. On one wall hung several framed paintings, seascapes in gold and blue, a sign of Sarah's presence lingering like a tender memory. Sophie kicked off her boots and ran ahead, calling, "Come see the piano!" Emma followed Daniel down a short hallway that opened into a living room. The piano was there, a slightly weathered upright with a few scratches on the polished wood, its keys a little yellowed with age. A thin layer of dust coated the lid. The instrument looked hungry for touch. Emma approached it slowly, as if afraid it might collapse into memory the moment she reached for it. She had not touched a real piano since before the accident. Her fingertips tingled with a mixture of fear and longing. Daniel stood a respectful distance away, watching with an expression she could not decipher. Not pity. Something deeper. Something careful. Sophie sat cross-legged on the floor, her chin resting in her hands, her eyes wide. Emma lifted the fallboard. The keys greeted her like old friends waiting in patient silence. She pressed one key. A single note, warm and imperfect, echoed through the room. It sent a tremor through her. She played another. Then a chord. Her hands trembled at first. Every movement a negotiation between muscle memory and pain she had tried for years to bury. But the sound, oh, the sound, poured out of her, filling the quiet cracks of the house with something that felt achingly like home. Notes flowed into a melody she hadn't meant to play. It was something her grandmother used to hum while stirring soup on winter nights. A simple tune, but her fingers shaped it into something fuller, richer, alive. The room warmed around her, though no heater changed temperature. When she closed her eyes, she could almost feel her grandmother's hand on her shoulder, steady as ever. When she finally stopped, breath shaking, she looked up to find Daniel standing frozen, lips parted, eyes damp. Sophie was kneeling now, leaning forward with her whole body. "That was magic," Sophie whispered, as though afraid to break the spell. Daniel stepped closer, voice thick. "Emma, I don't think I've heard anything like that in years." Emma looked down at her lap, suddenly self-conscious. "It wasn't perfect. It was human," Daniel said. "Which is better." Sophie tugged on Emma's sleeve. "Can you teach me? Can you teach me to do magic like that?" Emma felt her heart expand, almost painfully. She bit her lip. "I can try." Daniel exhaled softly, the kind of exhale that released something he'd been holding for months. "If you're open to it," he said gently, "I'd like to hire you, officially. Lessons twice a week. We can pay whatever is fair." Emma stared at him, stunned. This was more than kindness. This was stability. A chance. A beginning she never dared hope for. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that very much." And in that simple moment, surrounded by dusty keys and winter light, the music that had once died inside her began to breathe again. Summer arrived slowly that year, melting the last memories of winter from the sidewalks and settling over the town with a warm, honey-colored calm. The trees along the streets unfurled fresh leaves, and sunlight lingered longer each evening as if reluctant to leave. For Emma, the season brought new rhythms, unfamiliar but gentle, like the soft, repeating chord progression of a song she had once known by heart. Twice a week, she rode the bus to Daniel's house, her wheelchair secured by the familiar straps, the driver offering her a polite nod each time. The town had begun to look different to her now. Not kinder, not easier, but less sharp at the edges, softened by the knowledge that at the end of the ride waited a house full of music, warm light, and two people who seemed genuinely glad to see her. On one particular summer afternoon, the sky glowed with late-day sunlight filtering through leafy branches when Emma rolled up the pathway to the Hale home. Sophie burst through the front door before Emma even reached the ramp. The little girl was wearing a yellow sundress patterned with tiny sunflowers. Her curly brown hair had grown longer in the months since they met, now falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She smelled faintly of bubblegum shampoo. "You're here!" Sophie exclaimed, running to the end of the ramp. "I practiced all the finger exercises. My hand muscles are getting super strong. Look!" She flexed her tiny fingers with dramatic seriousness. Emma laughed. "Very impressive. Soon you'll be playing faster than me." "No way," Sophie declared. "You make magic." Emma hesitated only a moment before wheeling up the ramp into the familiar living room, where the piano occupied a place of quiet honor. The dust had long since vanished from its surface. Sheets of music lay neatly stacked on the stand, some printed, some handwritten in Emma's own careful script. Daniel came from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He wore a soft blue short-sleeved shirt that revealed strong forearms and a faint tan line from working in the sun, repairing a broken fence in their backyard. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run a hand through it while thinking. His face had softened over the months, the exhaustion around his eyes easing, though the deep-set grief behind his gaze never fully disappeared. But Emma had come to learn that grief didn't vanish. It settled, finding a place inside a person without crushing them entirely. "You're right on time," he said with a warm smile, and for a moment Emma forgot how to breathe. Time had given her a subtle tenderness toward him, though she didn't dare name it. "Had a good morning selling tickets?" he asked gently. Emma shrugged. "Better than usual. Summer crowds are kinder than winter ones. Or maybe they're just in better moods." Daniel glanced at her hands, noticing the faint tremor in her left wrist. "You didn't skip lunch again, did you?" Emma blushed. "I had a granola bar." He sighed, a familiar mixture of worry and admiration lighting his features. "Stay after the lesson. I've made roasted chicken and vegetables. You can't fight summer heat on a granola bar." She wanted to argue out of habit, but Sophie tugged her arm. "Please stay. Daddy puts too much pepper on the chicken unless someone tells him to stop." Daniel lifted an eyebrow. "That happened one time." "Two," Sophie corrected with a stern nod. Emma laughed softly. "All right, I'll stay." The lesson began. Sophie sat beside Emma on the bench, her small legs dangling above the floor. She played simple scales, her fingers stumbling but determined. Every mistake made her pause, frown, and then try again with refreshed focus. She was a child who didn't give up easily, a trait she had inherited from both parents. Her mother, Sarah, had once chased her artistic dreams with relentless passion before illness stole the strength from her tall, graceful body. Her hair had been pale gold, her skin soft and fair, her presence quiet but luminous. Daniel still spoke of her occasionally, always with equal parts love and sorrow, and Emma always listened with respect. When the scales ended, Emma guided Sophie through a beginner melody she had written specifically for her. A soft, floating tune meant to sound like the flutter of a butterfly's wings. Sophie's face lit up when she managed the first full line without stumbling. "Dad, did you hear?" she called across the room. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, smiling as though the sun had settled inside him. "Every note," he said. As Sophie practiced the final line, Daniel stepped closer to Emma, lowering his voice. "You're good with her. Better than you know." Emma kept her eyes on the keys, her heart beating too quickly. "She makes it easy." "You make it easy too," Daniel said gently. Her breath faltered. She wasn't used to admiration, especially not from someone like Daniel, steady, kind, and scarred in ways that mirrored her own broken places. She didn't look at him, afraid that one glance might betray everything she felt, but didn't understand. After the lesson, the table was set with roasted chicken, carrots caramelized at the edges, and warm rolls Sophie had helped shape. During dinner, Sophie talked endlessly about school friendships, summer crafts, and how she was planning to keep a piano diary of her progress. Her joy filled the room like birdsong. Daniel occasionally interjected a quiet commentary, or laughed softly when Sophie exaggerated a story. Emma mostly listened, absorbing every detail with a grateful heart. After dinner, they all sat on the back porch, watching the sky deepen into shades of lavender and soft blue. Fireflies blinked in the garden. Sophie lay stretched out on the porch swing, humming the butterfly song under her breath. Daniel sat beside Emma, not too close but not far, the kind of distance that acknowledged comfort without assumption. "You're part of her world now," he said quietly. "Part of ours." Emma swallowed hard. The evening breeze brushed across her cheeks. "I didn't expect that." "I didn't either," Daniel admitted. "But some things grow naturally, like this." She turned her head just slightly. He wasn't looking at her with pity, nor with obligation, just with quiet understanding, with gratitude, with something slowly deepening, patient as summer dusk. Sophie sat up suddenly. "Emma, can we have lessons forever?" Emma laughed, her voice trembling. "As long as you want." Sophie nodded decisively. "Good. Then we're like a team, a family team." Daniel looked at Emma, and she looked back, and though neither spoke the word family aloud, it pulsed softly between them like the steady beat of a heart returning to life. And in that simple summer evening, Emma realized they had already become a family long before any of them noticed. Autumn swept into town in slow, gentle waves, washing the summer warmth into memory and replacing it with crisp air carrying the scent of fallen leaves. The trees along Daniel's street blazed with fiery reds and soft golds, their branches shedding color like confetti across the pavement. The Hale home sat tucked beneath a canopy of maples, their leaves drifting lazily onto the front yard, where Sophie had already arranged 3 small pumpkins in a crooked row. The season seemed to cradle the house in a warm, amber glow, as though time itself had decided to soften. It had been nearly a year since the snowy afternoon when Emma met Daniel and Sophie, and life had settled into a rhythm that felt strange, only because it felt so right. Daniel had grown more relaxed with each passing month. His steady posture, once stiff with grief, now carried a quiet ease. The stern lines around his mouth had softened, and his hazel eyes no longer hid behind a curtain of old sorrow. He had grown out a short beard over the summer, flecked with early gray and framing his jaw with rugged maturity. Where grief had once carved hollows in him, Emma's laughter seemed to slowly fill them. Emma herself had changed in ways she never expected. Her cheeks, once hollow and pale from cold days selling lottery tickets, had taken on a healthier glow. Her brown hair, often tied carelessly, now fell around her shoulders with a natural softness. Her arms, once thin from exhaustion, grew subtly stronger from daily piano practice and constant movement of her wheelchair. Her eyes, formerly shadowed by loneliness, now reflected the warm, amber light of the Hale home. But the most profound change lay deeper. She felt seen, not as a burden, not as a girl in a wheelchair, but as a woman whose presence mattered. Every week she came for lessons, and every week after the lesson, she stayed for dinner. Eventually, the schedule stopped needing words. She simply belonged. And Sophie, bright-eyed, curly-haired Sophie, announced one evening in mid-September that Emma was officially part of our team, scribbling the declaration with markers on construction paper and taping it to the fridge. It wasn't long before Emma became woven into their daily life in ways none of them questioned. She attended Sophie's school concerts, helped Daniel choose groceries, and lit up the house with her music. The dusty upright piano transformed from an abandoned instrument into the beating heart of the home. But fall carried its own kind of nostalgia, and with the turning leaves came the memory of Sarah, Daniel's late wife. Around this time every year, Daniel grew quieter. Sarah had loved autumn with its warm colors and cool air. She had been tall and willowy, with light skin that flushed easily in the cold, and hair the color of wheat. She had possessed a soft elegance, like she lived half a step into a dream world. Her paintings, sunsets, shorelines, and sprawling forests still hung in the hallway, silent reminders of a gentle soul who left too soon. Emma felt no jealousy, only respect. She often paused before Sarah's paintings, absorbing the way the brushstrokes carried both tenderness and longing. She understood grief's language too well to feel threatened by its echoes. One late afternoon in early October, the sun dipped low, turning the front yard into a mosaic of amber shadows. Daniel had raked the leaves into a massive pile, and Sophie jumped into it repeatedly, erupting into peals of laughter each time. The breeze brushed softly across Emma's skin as she watched from the porch ramp, her heart swelling with warmth so full it almost frightened her. Daniel approached her with leaf-speckled hair, his breath visible in the cooling air. He had rolled up his sleeves, revealing his strong, lightly tanned arms marked by faint scars from past home repairs and occasional clumsy encounters with tools. There was a nervous energy in him, subtle but noticeable. "Walk with me?" he asked. Emma raised an eyebrow playfully. "I can roll." Daniel smiled, his dimples appearing faintly. "Then roll with me." They moved to the center of the yard, where the maple leaves created a golden carpet. The wind rustled overhead, sending more leaves drifting like slow-burning embers. Sophie, oblivious, continued her leaf-jumping ritual. Daniel turned toward Emma, his eyes warm but steady, the look of a man who had made a decision and was only now gathering the courage to speak it aloud. "Emma," he began, voice softer than the rustling leaves. "I've been thinking about this for a long time." Her heart fluttered. "About what?" He exhaled slowly, taking a step closer. "About us. About how you came into our lives without warning. About how everything changed, and somehow settled, because of you." Emma swallowed. Her hands rested on her lap, suddenly uncertain. He continued, his voice trembling just barely. "This isn't about replacing Sarah. Nothing could replace her. And it's not about feeling thankful because you helped us heal. It's simply because you belong with us. You always have. From the moment we saw you in that bakery, you fit into our world like you were meant to be there." Before Emma could speak, he lowered himself to one knee among the scattered leaves. The moment froze, quiet, tender, suspended in autumn air. "Not out of pity, not out of need, but out of love," Daniel whispered. "Emma, will you build a life with us? A messy, imperfect, beautiful life?" Sophie noticed the scene, gasped dramatically, and sprinted over, leaves clinging to her dress. She threw her arms around both of them. "Say yes," she said breathlessly. "Please say yes." Emma felt tears fill her eyes, warm as sunlight breaking through cloud. She looked at Daniel, at the man who had offered her respect, not rescue, kindness, not pity, space to grow, not a cage. "Yes," she whispered, voice cracking. "Yes," Sophie squealed, hugging them until they toppled gently into the leaf pile. Daniel laughed, pure and unrestrained, and the sound carried across the yard like a promise. The wedding was small, held a few weeks later beneath the very maple tree where Daniel had knelt. Emma wore a simple cream dress, her hair curled softly at the ends. Daniel wore a navy suit that made his eyes glow warm amber. Sophie served proudly as their flower girl, a crown of leaves and baby's breath perched crookedly atop her curls. Their vows were soft and sincere. Their kiss, warm and certain. Their family, complete in a way none of them had dared dream. And so began a tradition. Every year on Emma's birthday, they returned to the bakery. They bought a cake for a stranger in need, quietly passing forward the kindness that had changed their lives. From $3 lonely to a home full of music, Emma had found not just love. She found a family stitched together from broken pieces, made stronger because of their cracks. Sometimes Miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels or blinding light. Sometimes they come quietly, wrapped in kindness, in a chance encounter, in a moment when one heart decides to see another. Emma only had $3. Daniel only meant to buy a cake for his daughter. Sophie only wanted to help someone sad. And yet through those small, ordinary choices, God stitched 3 broken lives into one beautiful family. Maybe that's how his miracles truly work. Through everyday hands, everyday people, everyday kindnesses that ripple outward until they become something holy. And maybe you, watching this right now, have already been someone's miracle without even knowing it. So if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe, and help us spread more stories of grace and second chances. May God bless you, protect your home, guide your steps, and bring a miracle into your life, even if it arrives quietly, like a warm light in the middle of winter.